Hello, football fans. Welcome back to Scuffed Football Podcast. Our third week, but reviewing week 2. This is Noah. I'm Ted. We're going to cover the previous week, talk about upcoming things, some stories, some scores, cover fantasy, gambling, same shtick as always. So I guess the biggest news story of this week was the Trey Lance injury. Obviously, a week 2 injury kind of sucks because it derails your season, but to end your season in week 2 is huge. The thing that was interesting to me, though, about it, more so than just sucks that the kid got injured, because of course it does. How does this affect the 49ers? Because I heard a lot of analysis that, while Trey Lance can be a really good big name quarterback, Garoppolo's kind of better right now. I don't know what that does to the 49ers season.
I think it puts them back on a track of, again, I think they will make the playoffs this season. I do think that while they put a lot of faith into Trey Lance, I always said that I think Jimmy was a better quarterback. I think he's more experienced in that system as well. Again, he's been there longer. He led them to a Super Bowl. So that's great because, fuck me, right? Bro, I can't even turn it off.
At least Scuffed is in the title. We're making it accurate anyway.
Okay. Anyways, I think that I always thought that Jimmy was better, and I'm surprised that they almost let him walk. But I think that it puts them back on the fast track of getting into the playoffs. I don't think they would have made it this season, actually, with Trey Lance as behind center. So I'll be excited to see what goes on, how that goes.
I guess it's just interesting for me in a long term because, theoretically, Trey Lance has a higher ceiling. Garoppolo's been around long enough now that you know what he is, but he wins games in that system. There wasn't really a need to draft a young quarterback. I found it weird to start Trey Lance, but I guess if you're trying to develop that talent, you get some trade value out of Garoppolo, plus not having to pay his contract for a cheaper quarterback who has a higher ceiling in Trey Lance. But knowing that, if they go and they make the playoffs now, if they win a bunch of games with Garoppolo, is Trey Lance in the same seat as Garoppolo was next offseason, where they're looking to trade him following an injury, don't know what you're getting, and they're winning games with the quarterback they've got? It kind of seems like he could be trade bait, which would really suck after losing a whole season to an injury.
I think that they've committed a lot to Trey Lance, and I think that they're going to stick behind Trey Lance, and I think that will be their quarterback of the future. I will think that if Jimmy has a great season, right, I think they'll definitely be able to leverage him for an even better trade. You get as good as he was before, or as satisfactory as he was before. If he has a great season, then people are going to be over asking and everything. So I think that'll be interesting to see. I do think that they'll stick behind Trey Lance the start of next season. I don't think anything's going to change there.
I guess it just takes me back to after the Eagles Super Bowl and they traded away Nick Foles. I'm looking at that. He obviously makes too much money to be sitting anywhere. Garoppolo does. Right. But the guy obviously wins. Nick Foles is a Super Bowl MVP, and I'll be the first one to tell you that I think Garoppolo is a better quarterback. So to not only have him sit behind Trey Lance, not get traded to teams that were desperately looking for a quarterback, and then now that if he goes and he wins a whole bunch of games, to just try and ship him off again so that some other team can win just feels like the weirdest trade scenario ever to me. I can't make it make sense as to what, even to start Trey Lance this season. Obviously the injury adds a whole lot of extra variables that nobody could have seen coming, but it really, really bizarre, and it puts the 49ers in a really weird spot this year, especially if they start winning games.
It'll be interesting to keep an eye on that story, though.
Yeah, I think we'll get more answers as the season goes on. I mean, I wouldn't even rule it out to say that Trey Lance could go by the deadline. Just if somebody's willing to take a cheap quarterback who has a high upside on a cheaper contract, maybe. Even if you don't get him to play this season, at least they know they can invest in him if they trade for him. Right. I guess we have to see how the 49ers do, though.
Exactly.
The next big thing I had this week was comebacks. Week 2 featured a ton of big comeback games. coming back from really big deficits. The Jets came back to beat the Browns, which shocked me just that they won, but also to come back from that deficit and behind Joe Flacco of all people.
Yeah, exactly.
Tua and the Dolphins obviously made up a big deficit. Hard to believe that you can be. They could have played that well and been down at any point in that game, but they also came back. The Cardinals looked like they slipped a little, but they also had a pretty big comeback, winning in overtime. Even the Falcons were down a pretty big score. I know they ended up still losing the game, but they made up a whole lot of difference in that game. How much of that do you think is contributed to like either refereeing or new, I don't want to say new rules, but new enforcement of the rules that like is allowing these offenses to just take over late in games?
Honestly, I think that it's definitely not. It's definitely more where like last season we didn't obviously see as many. So I think it's like it's obviously again it's more slated for offenses to be able to come away with these big comebacks. So like refereeing wise, like I feel like probably not a lot of calls are being made, especially in like games obviously that like might have been like at the beginning of the fourth, like just be like, oh, this game's already over. So I think it's kind of more relaxed in the fourth. And again, like even having all those like big, like not like numerical wise, a lot of big comebacks. Like again, we're looking at the Dolphins, like they scored 28 just in the fourth alone. Like that's an absurd number that you don't see.
Yeah.
Like that's just like a game in general, not like a singular quarter. Even again with the Falcons 17, like that's what you see in a game. You don't see it throughout the like one quarter. And it's just the numbers there for like all the comebacks there during those quarters. It's been pretty big, so that's just how I've been seeing it.
I think it's interesting to me. Like I think it was 2 seasons ago they had the big like mid-season change on refereeing for pass interference specifically. They tried to like redefine it and make it really clear and obvious that like this is when it is, this is when it isn't. You know it when you see it, kind of thing. And I'm wondering if that like watching all of these comebacks and teams being really close in games is going to create a similar rule change. Obviously, I think it's a good thing to have these comebacks where like the Dolphins need to score 28 in the fourth quarter to come back and win that game, right? Like, obviously, it enhances the viewer experience. People are still talking about it. Like, I mean, it's good for the NFL, but it definitely makes it more difficult to know who's good, who's bad, or like what teams have been cheated out of wins. I mean, like, how bad would it have been if the Rams were up at one point, like more than 20 points, and they ended up losing that game to the Falcons, who we can pretty safely assume are not that good? Like, is that really good for the product if you're, big market franchise teams like the Rams are losing to the Falcons because of the way that the game gets officiated?
Right. I think market wise, probably not. But I mean, at the same time, I think having it like, closer games is definitely more exciting for the fans, I guess. But I think that like, market wise, like it would have not been ideal if we saw the Rams, a Super Bowl favorite, coming into the season, lose to the lowly Falcons. So again, like I think like for the fans, it'd be, cool that they made a good comeback. But again, if they had won that game, we'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah, it definitely, like, obviously those two teams aren't the only examples, right? Like the Jets and the Browns just aren't big market teams one way or another, and the product is obviously more exciting when it gets close at the end. But I guess just like how much are you affecting teams' win totals? How much do the owners get mad if they're losing games that they were winning the entire time? Like, I guess I'll just be interested to see if it causes any changes if this kind of trend continues.
Yeah, that's fair.
I did mention the Dolphins as a part of one of those comeback teams, and I know we touched on them a little bit, but their offense was so explosive this week. We wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't cover the Dolphins again. Tua had a massive week with 6 passing touchdowns. I think Waddle and Tyreek Hill both went over 150 yards, if I'm not mistaken.
And both 3 TDs. So
yeah,
that was like, I think it was like the record of like, or the first time in a while that 2 teammates had those stat lines. So that was pretty remarkable from Tua and Dolphins, I will say. I turned it off after the third quarter, and I was like, oh, okay, the Ravens won. So, and then I wake up the next morning, and the Dolphins win by 4. So I was like, oh shit. But definitely, yeah. I got killed in fantasy because of that. Annoying.
I had Tua in one league, and I had Waddle in another, so I ended up benefiting from both on both teams for it. But no, it's crazy to me what Shanahan is doing with that team. I mean, their defense was really good last season. They didn't get enough credit because their offense wasn't good enough to win any games, but the defense actually kept them in a lot. And I mean, even their winning streak last year was mostly on the defensive side. It's crazy what Shanahan has come. Like, he comes into Miami, only adds one real big piece, and they look like this. I mean, this offense is just prolific. Even after 2 games, like, they're just so explosive. There's so many threats on the field to throw to. They're making Tua look like he did at Alabama again, when he looked super pedestrian the past 2 or 3 years. It just absolutely incredible to me.
Well, I also think that a large part of that is also you have Tua being healthy. Like previous seasons, he's always gotten hurt early in the season, and again, like having more experience, again grabbing Waddle, and now they're even more comfortable. I think that kind of helps them, and I do think that the biggest part of that is, again, Tua being healthy is just Tua being healthy. He's doing things like, again, like you said, like he was doing in Alabama. And like I think we forgot what he was capable of because he's been injured. He hasn't been at 100%. But I think we're starting to see what he is at 100% again. And I think we're about to find out that they're very dangerous.
Miami is very, very scary. On the opposite side of the coin, I think we need to talk about the Colts. I know the AFC South is super weak. I mean, I think we both said it in our in our first week of podcast for our predictions for the season that the AFC was going to be really weak. But man, do they look embarrassing. First off, tying the Texans in week 1 was embarrassing, but then coming back and following that up, losing to the Jags.
Well, not only just losing, but getting shut out by the Jags. I think that's a different kind of exclamation point there.
Yeah, especially because I don't know how much better the Jags got, right? I mean, I know we'll touch on this in a little bit, but like I didn't see the Jags at that many pieces that would make them super threatening. I don't have a whole lot of belief in their quarterback. Trevor Lawrence he didn't even flatter me in college. I don't think he's.
Don't slander the Clemson quarterbacks, all right?
Listen.
What are you doing?
Listen.
We're going to fight.
Yeah. No, listen. Clemson had a really good football team, like, with him at the quarterback. It was a really good system that worked, but, like, I think college is a different measuring stick than the NFL. I don't think Trevor Lawrence was all that special. The same way, like, I didn't think Jameis Winston was that special in FSU. He was a good college quarterback, and he won a lot of games when he was there, but I don't know that skill set was necessarily going to translate to the NFL. Okay. So I don't mean any disrespect to Trevor Lawrence. Like, obviously the dude deserves to be there. He's good enough to be a starting quarterback. Don't get me wrong, but he doesn't wow me. Like, he's not going to take over games all by himself. I didn't see them add a whole lot of weapons on offense. I don't think Doug Peterson is a very prolific play caller, even though he won us a Super Bowl. I don't think that, like, I don't think that team was built for success. But I really thought the Colts would be better than this to get shut out by the Jags, man. Like, I didn't think the Jags got that much better for the Colts to look that bad this week.
No, I agree. I think that, honestly, like, the biggest thing that I watched over the summer of, like, for the Jags was just the return of Travis Etienne, which is offensively, like, I think that he makes that offense a little bit better, but, like, I don't think he makes them like that good that they make the Colts just look that bad.
Yeah. And even Etienne being healthy, like, yeah, maybe they put a few more points on the board, but for the Colts to not be good enough to, like, overcome the Jaguars defense, man, I thought it was realistic that Jonathan Taylor could push for an MVP season. I thought adding Matt Ryan instead of Carson Wentz would make the Colts look a whole lot better and a whole lot scarier to really threaten that division. And they just looked so pedestrian. I mean, it was like almost like the Jags were playing a high school team. It just they could not get it together.
I mean, it might just be, new system and new organization and new quarterback trying to get all together. They're just starting flat-footed, but yeah, even then, I still expected them to put some points up against the Jags. So
At least something, like early season stuff can be like guys learning a new system. I get that you may not win every game by 60 just because you added a new quarterback, right? Like I get it, but you got to put points on the board somewhere. You got to show that your system works. So you don't get fired halfway through the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Since this time last year, the Jags have had 3 different people acting as head coach. And I mean, if these guys don't have time to adjust, especially younger guys, ETN's not that long in the league. Trevor Lawrence, or not Trevor Lawrence. I sidetracked myself. Hold on. Let me back up. So the Jags, I didn't think they would be that good because new system, new guys, third head coach, younger guys, difficult to adjust to. But even they can still win the game and look really, really good. The Colts just, to compare to that, knowing all of the deficits against the Jags, all of these reasons that the Jags should be a not at all good team, the Colts have to put something together, man. You can't take a team like they had last year and lose to Jacksonville.
Right. I think what I'm about to say is pretty easy for someone who sits in a chair and goes to work. But I will say that I think that if I was playing right on the Colts and I had that scenario where I was down 0, even if it is a new system, I think I'd just go back to the basics of all right, just get short passes or short runs, just chip away and you'll make it down the field. I know it's obviously easier for me to just say do that, but I don't think the Jags defense is a good enough team that they'll consistently shut out or anything, or even get a shutout in general. So I expected the Colts to be better. I didn't expect them to be the best team in the league, but I didn't expect them to flop like this.
Nah, not at all. Especially in 2 division games to start the season, you have to come out a little hotter than that. Even just because you're competing against your division, not even because you're a great team. Just you should be competitive within the 6 games you get against your division every season. But
right.
The last team I want to put a spotlight on specifically is Cincinnati. We talked a little bit on our first podcast that I didn't know that Cincinnati was going to repeat. I didn't know that they were going to be a super dominant team just because they won the AFC. However, last season, a vast majority of their games were 1-score games. They won almost all of their wins on 1-possession scores through the regular season and the playoffs. Right. We've now seen them in 2 separate weeks lose on the very last play of the game. Field goal both times that they were in the game the whole time and lost by 3 points. Or I don't even remember if it was a full 3 points in week 1. But I'm wondering how we take Cincinnati from here, how much we believe that they can still compete and make noise if they were to get a playoff spot, because we haven't seen them get dominated. We just see them at 0-2 on a 1-score game, very similar to last season.
Honestly, I would take these 2 losses as a grain of salt. I don't have that much faith in Cincinnati. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a Cincinnati Bengals fan, but I will say that I think that the whole Super Bowl hangover kind of is a thing. I think they're started off very flat, but I think that in these games that they're still playing, they're in it. But losing on the last play is, both kicks is kind of just at the same time. Well, it is technically a loss, it's not they're not getting blown out. I think that they're in the game. If they just had another, if their defense stepped up for 1 stop, they would have had the game. So I wouldn't take these 2 losses too much into account for the Bengals. I do think they will kind of round back into form, and I think they will obviously make the playoffs again. I think they'll probably go to another championship, but they're not going to a Super Bowl per se. But I could see them making some noise. I would take these 2 losses as kind of just a little Super Bowl hangover.
I have to agree. The devil's advocate in me says that the thing that gets you into the playoffs is wins and losses, not how you looked in your losses, right? So I mean, NL in the score column still it still works against them, whether they lose by 2 points or whether they lose by 60 points. I mean, it always the same. So, I mean, they have put themselves in a hole, but I don't think they've played badly. Like that, I really think that they can step up and compete and make noise in their division. I'm hoping to see them step up true to form, what we know they can be. I'm with you that I don't think they're a Super Bowl team again, but like, I guess it's still weird to see them not correct anything from last season in terms of like separating themselves instead of being in these tight one score last play of the game kind of losses, and instead generating the offense that would score them enough points to not be so close at the end of the game.
Right.
Kind of on a similar train. I don't want to sound like a broken record from last week's podcast, but I am here to overreact to week 2. We kind of mentioned it that I think it's difficult to say after 1 week, just because football can be so random, how good a team is. But I think now that we've had a 2-game sample size, we can start to be reasonably surprised by certain things. So I know, Noah, you had one in the Lions, and honestly, they were on my list as well. They're surprisingly good. Like, I didn't necessarily expect them. I picked them to beat Washington this past week. Like, but even keeping up against the Eagles and then beating Washington, like they're surprisingly better than I thought they would be. Some other teams that I've highlighted look better than I was ready for them to. The Dolphins, even if I expected 2-0, like I didn't expect this. The Giants, even the Vikings look pretty competitive. I know this wasn't a great week, but they still didn't look awful. Right. There's a lot of teams that look really, really good that I wasn't ready to look this good.
I think going back to the Lions, I think again from the beginning of the season, I knew DeAndre Swift was a star, and I knew that going into last season, and I thought that coming into this season he was going to get a little bit better, and I thought that maybe he would carry them to maybe like a win or two. I did not expect Jared Goff to round back into form. However, I have doubted Jared Goff for such a long time, and I still will next week, okay? Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm 100% going to be like, he's going to fail. But if he proves me wrong, then, I'll eat my own words. But I did not expect him to throw 4 TDs. Even if it was against just the, Commanders, I still, again, I didn't expect that. I can't. I'm still trying to fathom the fact that he almost looks kind of like where he was back in with the Rams, having decent receivers back then. But I did not expect the 4 TDs from him. But again, going back on the other teams, I didn't expect the Dolphins to be this good, I think, and that's scary. The 28 points in the fourth quarter alone, it's just scary. I don't know. I'm getting scared. I will say though, touching on your the Vikings, I will say I think the Eagles, in my overreaction, I think the Eagles are for real right now. I think they've definitely found something in Jalen Hurts, and I think he's going to lead them to a playoff berth this season. I think that, obviously talking about the NFC East, it was kind of like it's up to 3 teams, and I think the Eagles are kind of separating themselves from that pack. Again, obviously the Dak injury kind of slights that towards the Eagles, but I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even within the rest of the NFC East, I mean, I didn't expect the Cowboys to look as good as they did without Dak Prescott. I mean, Cooper Rush really put together a solid game. And the Giants' defense has been unreasonably good. I didn't see them being 2-0 in my wildest expectations. Surprisingly good, and it wasn't just a 1-game sample anymore.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, I think there's some teams that are pretty surprisingly bad. I didn't foresee the Titans looking as bad as they did. Derrick Henry looking that weak in a primetime spot really, really took the wind out of my sails, because I didn't think that I thought you could hit him with an array of buses and he'd still be standing. Weird that they can't generate around a guy like that. I also am kind of surprised by the Raiders and the Panthers being as bad as they are. I Man, I said Derek Carr early was a sneaky MVP pick, and they just haven't been able to put it together. The Panthers, I thought, would have some sort of juice above and beyond last season, even if I didn't expect them to be good. Like, coming in with Baker and a whole lot of energy, still having receivers to throw to in a system that won them a handful of games last year. Like, it's kind of weird to me to see them look not so great. It's
Right.
really surprising, I guess, some of the teams that have made this stand out after 2 weeks. When you do have a sample size to judge it on, and it's not just a football happens kind of thing.
Right. I do think that the biggest surprise for me was definitely the Titans. Again, like the past season, like the few seasons, we've known Derrick Henry to just run through teams and just carry himself. I will say that I think the Bills are a different animal with their defense. But I also think the Bills, just in general, obviously, got to vouch for that. That I think they also have that power of just making like decent teams look just terrible. And I think they did that on Monday. I didn't expect the Titans to come as flat-footed in a potential AFC matchup there. But again, like I do think the Bills are just that good that they make the Titans that bad. Again, going back on your Raiders, they definitely fumbled this one. They had it.
Well,
They were up
yeah.
16 entering the fourth, and then they lost it. Well, not only losing on a fumble, but they definitely, even if a field goal would have won them that game. So I'm surprised by how flat they were in the end, especially with the game on the line.
Yeah.
As for the Panthers, listen, it's still Baker at the end of the day. I don't trust him.
I'm not saying I expected them to be a Super Bowl team. You know what I mean? I wasn't expecting, huge flashes of greatness, but I also expected them to be better than this. I didn't think they lost a whole lot, and I still think Darnold to Baker is an upgrade. I mean, even if they're not winning every game, they still don't look good. As far as the Raiders go, I don't mean to take anything away from the Cardinals, because obviously they played the fourth quarter and overtime really well, but I mean, I thought the Raiders were a good enough team to keep a 16-point lead against most teams in the league.
Yeah.
Some weird ones that I'm not sure what to do with. Actually, most of the teams out in the NFC West. I'm not sure how to take any of those teams, to be completely honest with you. Even after this 2-game sample where I'm trying to overreact, I still don't know how to feel about any of them. The Rams kind of didn't look great. Again, it's the Bills and they're super dominant, I understand. But then to come out in week 2 and almost blow a lead to the Falcons, I'm really not sure what to do with them. Same thing with the Seahawks. Same thing with the Cardinals. Moments of looking like a really good team, moments of just not having it. And I really, even after 2 games, I still don't know what kind of teams those are.
I mean, when it comes to that, I think that again, you could kind of, I don't want to make an excuse, but I guess you could kind of say maybe the Rams are coming off a little flat-footed, post Super Bowl. But again, I do agree that they don't seem to be the same monster they were last season. I think they definitely put up more of a fight. Like, they were blowing teams out, and to come that close with the Falcons is something else. As for, the Seahawks, they lost Russell Wilson. Then you replace him with Geno, and like he comes out, wins game, week 1, but it's also, Geno. So
right, I guess I just I don't know how to take them in a 2 games is not necessarily a big picture perspective, but it's hard to predict what kind of team they're going to be through the season based on the ups and downs we've seen in just 2 short games.
Right. And I will say, the Cardinals wise, I like last season they were already, beating teams off the field, and then you need, the third, fourth, and OT to win a game, in which a game that I would have favored the Cardinals, a lot more than just 6 points here. So I think I expected the Cardinals to be better as well. I guess we'll just have to kind of see how week 3 treats them. And maybe we'll see some of them round back into, the top teams that they were last season. But I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Some other things, too, like as you mentioned, the Rams being dominant last season. I was kind of expecting a similar path this year for both the Chargers and the Ravens. And again, both of those are teams that I don't necessarily know what to do with this season. Moments of looking really good, moments of looking not so good at all. And just not, I guess, not making a statement one way or another. Like, it's hard for me to look at two games and be like, oh, well, they're going to go 9-8 or 8-9 and just be a middle of the road team, when I expected both of them to be pretty strong competitors in the AFC that I thought was really filled out with talent, or with competitors at the very least.
Right. I mean, I think that with the Chargers, again, I wouldn't take this week into like putting them two down. I do think that, again, it is Patrick Mahomes. It is the Chiefs. I think that they can come back from anything. They've kind of proven that, going back even a few years when they were down 31 to the Texans with Deshaun Watson. So, like, I expect them to win those games, even if it's a comeback. As for the, the Ravens, like, I don't think they saw the Dolphins scoring 28 points in the fourth. So, like, I anticipate that next week they'll come out a lot better and a lot sharper, and they won't make the same mistakes in the fourth quarter if they have a big lead. So that's what I expect.
Yeah. One last one that I really don't know what to do with is the Jets. I know they're the Jets. I know they're not going to be super competitive, but to see what they did against Cleveland, to come back and win, even with a guy like Joe Flacco, I don't think Joe Flacco dominates any game he's ever played. So to see them be so stoic and solid as a unit against Cleveland, I thought was pretty impressive. But I also know at the end of the day that it's the Jets. And when their first week was against the Ravens, I still just, I don't know how to feel about them. Another team that I guess could make more noise than I thought they would, but like maybe not as successful as they want to be. I really don't know where to stick with the Jets either.
I will say that while, again, Flacco has kept them, above water, they are going back to their normal QB. So they're going to put Flacco back up. So I expect the Jets to suck again. Very soon. I'm not gonna lie. But I will say it was very surprising to see Flacco in a dominating role. I definitely was not expecting that, but I expect them to go back to form of being bad soon.
Yeah, I genuinely trust Joe Flacco more than I trust Zach Wilson, especially if Wilson's coming off an injury. But even at the end of the day, like, to be put in a position where Joe Flacco of all quarterbacks can win you a game, like, that, it's got to say something, right? Like, they have to be better than the Jets have always been. I don't know. It could be they could make a couple of games pretty interesting, I think. The last thing I want to do after week 2 surprises, or week 2 overreactions rather, I want to talk about the transitive property and trying to predict games. So, like, for example, Eagles beat Minnesota. Minnesota beat Green Bay. Can we confidently assume that the Eagles could beat Green Bay? And things along those lines. Can we?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, listen. All right, week 1, Packers came out flat. That's how it is sometimes. Like, you got a team that just lost, your best receiver, and I expected them to be flat, but I didn't expect them to lose, which is fine. Whatever. I am gonna say that I do think the Eagles would put up a fight, but if you want to talk about transitive, right? Yeah. Let's talk about just like scoring wise, right? So the Packers scored 27 this week, and the Eagles scored 24. That's exactly the score I would anticipate if they played each other, 27-24, and I think the Packers would win. But I think it would be a lot closer than that actually says. Like, I think that 3 points would be like a grinding just game of just sweat, tears, and blood. I think they're both grinders, so
I guess that was an example for instance, but I guess I'm more wondering, later on in the season you can't necessarily use that transitive property because everybody's played half the league, but to do so early, to be able to predict games, to know how good a team actually is, like the Giants beating the Titans, right? Like, let's say the Titans go out this week. Who do they get this week? They get the Raiders, right? So if the Titans beat the Raiders, can you does that influence your decision at all to believe that like the Giants have an advantage over the Raiders? It may not be true. It may not be true in every situation, but I am interested that like when these teams are starting to take shape with a couple of games under their belt, 2, 3, 4 games into the season, like can you start to like use these early wins as indicators to how a game might go or what kinds of things might surprise you?
I think in some instances you might be able to, as much as that pains me to say.
Yeah.
I think that like it depends on also the team. Like if the team's on a hot streak, like let's say the Lions pop off for like 4 straight games, and they're all over unexpected, people like, but like you go into the game knowing it's still the Lions, like you would probably still bet against them, even if they have beaten teams that like, I don't know I kind of forget who the Commanders played in week 1. But whoever they played. All right, now I got to figure it out.
The Washington was at home against the Jaguars week 1.
Oh, well, never mind. That's a terrible example because I think the Jags. All right, well, but I think that it does depend on the trend of the team. I think that if they're on a hot streak and like let's say the Giants, right? Like just using them as an example, like if they win like another 2 games in a row, I think I'm riding high on them, and I think that I would bet that a hot streak beats a good team just because they're in the zone right now. I do think that, like, let's say the Giants ran up against the Bills. I would never put the Giants beating the Bills. Even if they had like a 12-game win streak, I would never do that because I think that the Bills obviously would break that win streak. But I think that it does depend on a hot streak. But you can use for early games, early season. It would be interesting. I guess it kind of does depend, though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's true in every situation. I mean, there's just some games that are stunners, right? Like, and I think to some extent, it's difficult to use like the score of games to determine how good a team is comparatively, right? Like you could say that the Chargers held the Chiefs to 17 points, right? And normally that sounds like a really big deal because the Chiefs are always hitting the over, right? But
right,
like, I don't know that you could use that to say like, well, the Chargers kept up with the Chiefs and then the Chiefs blew out the Raiders, for example, by 50. I don't know that you could expect the Chargers to win by 50, right? But if that gives you any indicator that like, look how well the Chargers played against the Chiefs, the Chargers to go into Vegas and like, I would expect them to win regardless of what my like predisposition for the teams is. And it's just, I think it's kind of interesting with such a small sample that where like, the Bills have only played 2 games, right? Maybe the Rams aren't that good. Maybe the Titans aren't that good. And what you're seeing from the Bills' dominance isn't real because we only have a 2-game sample size. Obviously, I don't buy that to be true. I think the Bills are absolutely dominant. But the point being, though, that like, if you start to use these comparisons about who's already beat who to predict in future games, like I think it's just got an interesting argument as to like how good you can assess somebody to be for future weeks.
Right.
At least early in the season. I guess unless you got any other stories or teams you want to cover, I think we touched on everything from both our lists, but I guess that drags us into fantasy. We mentioned it a little bit. Obviously, some winners this week were anybody who had Dolphins on offense. Waddle, Hill, Tua. Obviously big winners. The other thing that stood out to me as far as like really high value players was investing early picks into Nick Chubb and Aaron Jones. I really think they're going to be solid pieces for a fantasy team this season. Just absolutely incredible that like even through up and down weeks, they've both dominated their games in terms of fantasy scoring, at least.
Oh yeah, for sure. Listen, I think kind of the biggest takeaways was, again, those Dolphins, and I think that Stephon Diggs proved in the fantasy aspect, and not just like on the I 100% believe that he's a top receiver, but I think fantasy-wise, he's proved that, he's back in that conversation. And unfortunately, I went up against both Waddle and Diggs this week, okay? So they just won that game by themselves, okay? But no, definitely those are definitely high riders right now. Definitely big winners.
Yeah, we and on the other side too, some flops. I know we brought up Derrick Henry's pedestrian week this week, and obviously playing against the Bills is going to make anybody look not as good as they actually are. But sorry to anybody that had Derrick Henry this season, because I thought he was going to be a real solid player that was going to get you a ton of points all season long, and even just to get that man the touches he needs to try something, I didn't think he achieved that this week. Just kind of difficult, but
I will say, just touching on running backs like that, like Derrick Henry, another big name that, flopped was James Conner. And, I expected a lot more from him this week. I thought he was going to have that consistency, but again, they didn't really get that run game involved until later into the game. And I think he would have definitely been better off if they got him into the first 2 quarters there.
Yeah, it's weird with fantasy because sometimes you get put in a difficult spot, right? Like, I don't think there is any reason that he wouldn't have succeeded later in that game, but you kind of have to make up the yardage because you're down by 16 in the fourth quarter. It doesn't necessarily give the opportunity for carries and short yardage plays when you've got a deficit to make up.
Yeah, exactly.
Hard for me to even call James Conner a flop, but even if this was a down week, like, it may not necessarily be like a long-term implication for the rest of his fantasy season. You have to hope that they get some more leads being a better team and start running the ball more often. But one interesting thing that I want to talk about is I think we're at the point in the season now where we can start to talk about sleepers, maybe guys that haven't stepped up, guys that may be undervalued to this point, but have the intention of stepping up. One of those for me is Kyle Pitts. I know he plays for Atlanta. I know it. I know Mariota's his quarterback. He's such a good tight end. And I think when you get into the season where you're trying to just grind out any sort of win, as it appears that Atlanta is going to do, the tight end's usually a pretty safe option, especially when the tight end is good. I think he's going to start getting his looks. He's going to start getting his touches, especially once this team figures out their identity and what works for them. I know my mom is one of the people who's about to drop Kyle Pitts this week just because he's underperformed, but I'm assuming that he's going to become available in some leagues to get your hands on, at least to bench him for now if you got a decent tight end, but to see him step up in some future weeks.
I would agree with that for sure.
Another thing too, as far as maybe some undervalued things go. I know in every fantasy league I've ever played in, you draft a defense based on who's going to lose you the least amount of points. But this week there were 9 defenses around the league that scored 10 points or more, which is huge, especially when if you had Derrick Henry on your team, but you also went out and got a defense with multiple takeaways or a defensive score or blocked kicks, whatever. Defenses can provide a lot of value, and I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row we've seen some defenses with some pretty decent scoring.
Yeah, I think when it comes to defense, though, I think I have my main defense, which would be a top defense. I think that week to week, though, I always just in general, I just look and see who's having a really good matchup. So this week, I know I picked up the Falcons defense. I don't put a lot of faith into the Falcons defense, but they're also playing Seattle, which I don't put a little to no stock in them winning a game. So I think that that matchup versus me going with the Rams, who are playing the Cardinals, I think that the Falcons defense would get me more points there. So that's what I always do before a week. I always look at who has an easy matchup.
Yeah, I mean, historically, I've done similar things. I guess it's just weird to see that defenses can actually have value instead of just to cut bleeding this season. I mean, we're at two weeks now with some big. I lost week 1 in your fantasy league specifically because I was playing against a Dolphins defense and they scored 19. The defensive touchdown, couple sacks, an interception. Defenses are showing that maybe they can make up some of the difference. I don't know how consistent you can expect a defense to be. I mean, interceptions, fumbles, sacks aren't necessarily given, but it can provide some value this season that I haven't necessarily seen in years past.
I mean, I'm looking at this week, and your defense got 25 points.
Yeah, they might have.
and it's like the Buccaneers are a good defense, and I'm looking, at some other defenses like the Buffalo Bills got 22 points. That's just crazy to me. Like these defenses are really making a difference, like you said. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how that keeps going.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that probably wraps us up for everything other than picking lines. Another not so great week. Noah went 6-10. I went 4-12. Brings Noah to a total of 10-22, and myself at 8-24. At this point, I'm just trying to cut the bleeding and just trying to get to 500 by the halfway point of the season. That's all I'm looking for, because at this point, fading me is going to make you more money. All right, I guess we'll just get right into it. Starter off, we've got Steelers at the Browns. Browns are -5.5 at home.
Honestly, I think that kind of depends on if the Steelers have TJ Watt available. So right now, he's not playing. So I'm going to go with the Browns, and I will say they probably win by 4.5. So
yeah, I think the Browns have looked pretty good. I know losing to the Jets is a stunner, but the Steelers haven't necessarily done anything to wow me. Browns playing at home for the first time this season, I think that's going to be a pretty big deal. Or no, I guess they were home against the Jets last week, weren't they? So either way, I mean, coming off a game like that, the Steelers coming into town, a divisional game, I think they're figuring themselves out. I think they'll win by 6. Got the Ravens at the Patriots. Ravens are 3-point favorites on the road.
I think they're going to win by more than 3. I think they're going to round back into 4, and Lamar Jackson's going to show us why he was the MVP a few seasons ago. And I think it's going to be a blowout here. So Ravens by a lot more than 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Patriots look a little broken. Like they just don't look cohesive as a team on either side of the ball, to be honest with you. I guess that's what's going to happen when Matt Patricia's calling your offense, though. Yeah. And even though the Ravens lost this past week, like they still put up a shitload of points. It would be pretty hard for me to believe that they can't repeat the same thing against the Patriots. So I'll take the Ravens too. Bills at the Dolphins. Dolphins are 5.5-point underdogs at home.
Listen, it's still my Bills, so I'm going Bills. I agree with the 100%. I will say I think that the Dolphins can make this very interesting, but at the end of the day, it's still the Bills, and I expect the Dolphins to finally see and play against a defense that's worthy of their time here. And I think they're about to find out why they probably won't be in the AFC Championship.
This is a really difficult one for me because, like, either way you go, you're betting against a team that's hard to bet against. I mean, to look at what the Dolphins did this past week and to say, I'm going to pick the Bills hurts because you're not picking the Dolphins. The same ticket, if you pick the Dolphins and the points, they have to beat the Bills to do it. Betting against the Bills sucks. Not to be boring and to pick the same one again, but I think I'm going to go with the Bills just because I have to believe that they're a better team. I really don't know what to do with the spread, though. Giving the Dolphins 5 points when I watch their offense be that good makes me feel like I'm going to lose this one.
But it's also the Bills' defense, defense that came away, but...
I mean, I guess we'll see how it works out, but I have to pick the Bills just because I think they're the better team on paper. I don't know what to do with the spread, but I got to take the Bills. Next game I've got another division game. Saints at the Panthers. Saints are 3-point favorites on the road.
So I'm gonna go with the Saints because I think Kamara's gonna be back, and I think he's gonna just put the Saints on his back and run them all the way home. So I'm going Saints. I think it will probably be a close game, though. I will agree with the 3.
I've picked the Panthers both of the past 2 weeks to cover the spread, to get themselves together and to look good, and they just haven't. I want to root for Baker just because I think he got shafted this season. But the way the first 2 weeks, the way they've gone, I have to take the Saints. I can't keep putting faith in the Panthers until they show me something. I have Chiefs and the Colts. Chiefs are 6.5 favorites on the road. I don't know about you, but for me, that's a no-brainer. Chiefs by a lot more than 7.
I think just based off the Colts' past two performances, I think anyone in their right mind would pick the Chiefs for a lot more.
Well, and in the grand scheme of things, if the Colts play like they did last week, in order for the Chiefs to cover, all they have to do is score a single touchdown because no points against the Jags. I think this is an easy one.
Yeah.
I have the Lions at the Vikings. The Vikings are 5.5-point favorites at home.
Listen, I'm going with the Lions. I'm putting my faith in the Lions right now. I put my faith in DeAndre Swift, and right now, as much as I think that the Vikings could win this game, I think that Jared Goff is playing above where he was slated to be, and I think that DeAndre Swift will still be DeAndre Swift, and I don't think the Vikings win this one.
I think the only difficult part for me for this one is the 5.5 points. If it was just picking a game straight up, I would take the Vikings and I wouldn't think a whole lot about it. I know the Lions have been playing way better than I expected this season, and I'm not trying to shade them at all, but I also think that like they got to come back down at some point, right? Like, I mean, 2 really high weeks playing really well. I don't think I think they're good. I don't think they're that good to keep that pace up all season. The Vikings just have a whole ton of offense. I think I'm going to take the Vikings even minus 5.5.
All right.
All right. I have the Eagles at Washington. Washington are 6.5-point dogs.
I don't.
Division games.
Eagles.
Yeah, division games are always tough for Philadelphia, but I mean, I picked against them. I picked the Vikings, and the Eagles surprised me and looked really good. I got to take the Eagles. Have to. Next one's interesting for me. Raiders at the Titans. Raiders are 2.5-point favorites. I really don't know. I mentioned both of these teams earlier in the week 2 overreactions, but I guess the Raiders just haven't created an identity necessarily. I think the Titans just aren't as good as I believed that they could be. I think I'm going to take the Raiders on the road just because I believe that they have the capability to be better than the Titans have showed me they can be.
I think I'm with you. I think I do pick the Raiders. I haven't seen the Titans be able to win this season. I don't think that I've seen the Raiders be in games, and granted, I mean, they lost in OT, but I think that they'll kind of clean it up this week, make sure they don't make the same mistakes. So I got to go Raiders.
Next one I've got is the Texans at the Bears. Bears are 2.5-point favorites at home.
I'm putting my faith in the Bears. I think the Bears are outperforming themselves. I think Justin Fields is looking really good right now. As much as that's weird to say, I think I'm going Bears.
I agree. All the same reasons. I don't think the Texans are that good, but Justin Fields looks like he found something this offseason that he never had in him before. I didn't even think they had the greatest week 2, but they've looked like a really solid, cohesive football team. I don't see them doing anything less than a 3-point win against the Texans.
Yeah.
Next one is Bengals Jets. Bengals are 4.5-point favorites on the road. Man, I don't know. I think the Bengals are a better team. I think 4.5 favorites is a pretty solid number, but I did just watch Joe Flacco and the Jets take out the Cleveland Browns. Man, I don't know. Let's take an upset. Let's pick the Jets with 4.5 points at home. I think we could see them do it.
I'm taking the Bengals. I think they perform just like they were, last season, and I think they kind of put the Jets back into like know your own place mode, and I'm going with the Bengals this time.
All right. I have the Jaguars at the Chargers. Chargers are 7-point favorites.
I think that's a pretty easy one. I'm going Chargers.
I'm actually going to take the Jaguars just because the spread is at 7. Chargers haven't looked bad, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that's going to be a closer game than people are given credit for. The Chargers do some weird stuff against bad teams. They have for forever. Even back in the LaDainian Tomlinson, Phillip Rivers days, they lost to some real shit teams. So I think I'm going to take the Jags if you're going to give me 7 points.
All right.
Next one is Falcons at the Seahawks. Seahawks are 1.5 favorites at home. See, I always think that these games against not good teams are the difficult ones because very rarely are they close. It's one team is just way more bad than the other team is bad. But to say who the bad team this week is going to be is really tough. I think for me, I'm taking the Falcons. I watched them score a bunch of points late against the Rams. That I have to think that they could do it again against a team that's not even nearly as good as the Rams are.
I gotta agree with you. I'm going Falcons just off week 2.
I have Packers at the Buccaneers. The Bucs are 2.5 favorites at home.
I think that'd be fair. I think Bucs, and yeah, I agree with that actually.
Same idea as picking the Panthers every week. I've picked against the Bucs every week just because I didn't think Tom Brady has looked that impressive. I keep losing. I can't keep doing it. Got to take the Bucs. Rams Cardinals. Rams are 3.5 favorites on the road.
Ooh.
This one feels like it could be a toss-up to me because both of them have shown moments of being good and both of them have shown moments of not at all.
I guess I gotta go with the Rams. I believe in Cooper Kupp more. I think that the DeAndre Hopkins being out is a bigger loss than people are saying it is. So I gotta go with the Rams. I don't think the Cardinals win this one.
I think just to fade you, I'm gonna go the other way. I think that game's gonna be super competitive. It's super hard to pick, but we gotta add some parity somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Sunday night, I have the 49ers at the Broncos. Broncos are 1-point dogs at home. So basically a toss-up.
I think I actually go Niners here. I think that I think Russell Wilson just hasn't shown the same flair with the Broncos as he was with Seattle. And I think that Jimmy G's now coming out with something to prove that, like, you know, he's got to fill this role of, you know, leading them back into the playoffs. I think he's going to come out and shine.
You know, if Trey Lance hadn't been injured and this was the same line, I think I'm taking the Broncos and not thinking about it.
Exactly, yeah.
But because it's Garoppolo, I hate to say it, but I think they got better. And so I'm also going to take the Niners. I think the Broncos have the potential to win this game. Like, I don't think this is a free pick by any means, but I definitely think the 49ers got better with Garoppolo under center. I think I got to stick the Niners. And then last game of the week is Cowboys at the Giants. Giants are 2.5 favorites at home.
Oh.
That's a disappointed look, man. You look like you're struggling.
Well, all right. Well, for example, right? It's been 6 years since the Giants started 2-0. But going back into last week, like, granted they won, but the Cowboys, they barely won. Like, Ezekiel Elliott didn't do anything. Like, he wasn't present in that game, I feel like. And I think that this is going to be his bounce back week. So I'm going with the Cowboys. I think they're going to ruin the little 2-0 Giants. It's going to be close.
I think this is going to be the game of the week. I don't see any game being more competitive than this one, mostly just because it's in the NFC East and those games always work that way.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have a lot of faith in Cooper Rush, despite the fact that he looked really good last week. The Giants' defense has been superb. So if Zeke Elliott can't get it started, Cooper Rush isn't the caliber that Dak Prescott is. I'm taking the Giants.
All right.
All right, we split a few that week. Hopefully we can make up some ground, get ourselves closer to 500 this week. Maybe win a few of them. But I think that about wraps up everything I had on my sheet. Unless you got anything else before we get out of here.
No, I'm good.
All right. For the gambling lines, as always, provided by FanDuel. I did pull these lines on Tuesday rather than today, Wednesday, just to keep things consistent. Lines are subject to change. Please gamble responsibly. Also know that we're not providing gambling advice, just providing our opinions. If anybody has has a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER. All those fun things that I'm supposed to say. All right. I think that wraps it up for this week. We'll come back at you next week. I'll keep you guys posted on Twitter and try to remember to put it in Discord if we got to alter again from Tuesday. Otherwise, I think that wraps us up, and we'll see you next week.